Moriden Athluan.
The champion of Kinneret. Moriden showed the beauty of nature by finding renewal for the great and glorious Gildergreen of Whiterun, providing a place of worship for all manner of men and mer.
The champion of Daibella, the only man to enter the most sacred places of the temple in Markat and live. He, who found out the Daibellian symbol and returned her to the temple, so that all could hear the will of the great goddess.
The messenger of Mara, whose small words and influence sparked two of the greatest love stories of all time in Skyrim.
Moriden was at the height of his goodly deeds when word reached him of a new threat to Skyrim and its people.
Like the mighty champion of the people he had become, he looked up to the role of the people's champion once again and set off to destroy the vampire threat.
Come closer and hear the story of how he destroyed one of the oldest threats to
Still
man
searching
and
for stories about me, I see. I hate to disappoint you, but this portion of my story, you won't find a single bard who knows what he's talking about. That's fine now. We have time, my friend. I can tell it far better than they can, as they tell it for entertainment, not because it is truth. Because the truth is not what the bards would have you believe. Three Suns Dusk, 4th Era, 201. Solitude lay sleeping when we arrived around midnight. I made my way, not unseen, but not paid any attention to Castle Dower. Its walls were near empty, the once bustling rooms now near dormant with the war over, and no tactics or strategies to plan. No messages to dispatch or receive. It makes me wonder what the general is still doing here. Surely this is a waste of his talents. It does provide me with another tasty bit, though. I've come to decide that there is a special power in some of these people I have fed upon. Kodlak, Isran, the general, all of them gave me a taste of something more, something powerful in their blood. Surely there are more. Perhaps Delphine. I may have to work a little vampire magic on her to get that taste, but the results may well be worth it. In the meantime, the general has added to my power, even if he'll never know it. With that out of my way, there is one more thing to do here in Solitude that I had forgotten. It was the easiest of the clues to decipher. The location of the sword of the Crusader. It's right in the open, almost on display, as it were, in the Temple of the Eight, just a few yards from where I stood, still licking the blood from my lips. The sword of the Crusader, long hidden in plain sight, in a chest that nobody knew how to open, under the sigil of Archay even. the blessing that would have been needed to open it had I not the Ring of Amil. I was in and out so quickly that it is likely none will ever know that I have taken it, unless, of course, someone actually knew what was supposed to be in that chest, and then sees it on proud display at the museum. In which case, who is to say whose story is true? I met with my contact at the Skiva in the early morning hours. All had long since gone to their beds, the owners included, so we were left to ourselves as he explained what he was willing to do. In short, I give him all the gear I think I will absolutely need, and he will smuggle it into the embassy for when I break away from the main party. That left me scrambling for some party clothes in the meantime, fortunately easily found in a couple of wardrobes. The fit is not the best, but it will suffice for today's events. As for Lady Serana, she was disappointed that we would not be going as a pair. Delphine made it clear that she would only get one invitation, and that means she has to remain behind. I promised her, though, that if I could, I'd snatch a bottle of Colovian wine for her. She can toast to the downfall of the Thalmore when I get back. With my preparations complete, minus my last meeting with Delphine, I slept for a few hours to pass the time. It was a nostalgic experience. I met with Delphine, but the last details were the ones I had already guessed would be in play. She provided the invitation, some last obvious instructions, and then sent me on my way. Why is it that people seem to insist on telling you to do the obvious? Why not remind me to breathe as well? Oh. Right. I don't have to anymore. Forget I said anything. I was taken by carriage to the embassy, where I met, briefly, Alduin, the first ambassador to Skyrim from the Aldmiri Dominion. That is a very long way of saying that she is the one flexing the Dominion's muscles and making the Empire jump. I avoided, barely, giving my own name, not wanting to give them anything more to hunt me with after this was over. I knew it was going to get ugly, and the Thalmore were going to want blood. I mixed with the other guests for a bit, including speaking with General Tullius and a few other worthies. Once everything was going relatively smoothly, however, I arranged for it suddenly to not go smoothly. In the distraction, provided by a drunk merchant out of the south, I slipped out of the room with the Bosma and retrieved my gear, and then got locked into the other half of the embassy. The business half. Though I tried for stealth, I wasn't able to maintain it long. There were simply too many of them. Once I killed the first, it would be only a matter of time before the rest found that body, and then the shouting and excitement would begin. I waited for the opportune moment, and began the killing frenzy. Again, with the daylight still bright, I fought at a disadvantage, but did not reveal my alternate form. I relied only on my sword and shield. It was enough. After the interior was cleared, I exited the main building, heading for the other part of the embassy compound, where I had to dispatch 2 more guards. I have now unlimited time to find what Delphine wants, since I don't think my overheard conversation detailing how some of the Thalmore had no idea where the dragons were coming from, but felt that feeding the Dominion mages to them might be a great idea, would count. Lenman's office was not hard to find, and by pure luck, nobody inside the Solar heard anything outside. This allowed me to overhear another conversation, one that confirms that the Thalmore have someone providing them information and targets to interrogate. Having avoided this unknown asset as he was leaving, I entered her office and began my search. I found what I needed almost immediately. First, they know that Delphine, who, by the way, is far more dangerous than I would have thought, is here in Skyrim, though not where. She has avoided all contact with the other remaining blades, which, given the Thalmore have found and interrogated almost all of the known living ones left, is the only thing that has kept her alive. Second, and quite late to the party at this point, is that Ulfric Stormcloak was, for all intents and purposes, a Thalmore agent. He was listed as dormant, with the notation not to approach him directly, but at least up until his actions in Markarth, he was a willing and active collaborator. Not that I felt the least bit bad before, but I feel even better about ending that man's life. The fact that his dossier wasn't updated to reflect his total failure is likely for that exact reason. Finally, there was a report about the status of the Thalmore investigation into the dragon attacks. In short, they have no more idea than we do. What they do have is an information source, the same one that the asset I avoided earlier turned over to them. If they are still alive, and sane, then denying the Thalmore that information and taking it for ourselves seems the smart move. And I do so try to be smart about things. The person being questioned was a Riften native. I stayed in the shadows, listening to the session. The man doesn't know anything, really, but it's clear that the Thalmore are looking for someone named Esbern. From the tone and intensity of the questions, I'm guessing another of the blades that have been thorns in their side for decades. Once I was certain I'd heard everything I needed, I slit the interrogator's throat and then killed the only other guard. In a chest, I found more documents, one of which confirmed my guess about this Esbern they are looking for. Not only is he a blade, he's a lore master, one of the blades whose specialty is dragons in particular. No wonder he's a high-priority target, and something Delphine will want to know about. If he is alive and in Riften, if the information given by the prisoner I freed is correct, then we might lose out on the best information on the dragons we might get. And the fact is, the Thalmore have no more idea what is going on here than we do. Both sides are blaming each other, mostly because it hasn't occurred to them that any other possibility exists. Now, to get out of here. 4 Suns Dusk, 4th Era, 201. I made a quick stop in Solitude to pick up Serana, and we were on the road to Riverwood to meet up with Delphine and figure out our next steps. Given that Esbern is a blade, according to the Thalmore notes, I suspect she's going to want to get him involved in whatever it is she's planning, which means I am likely to head to Riften. That was about as much as I was able to figure out during the ride. And as we passed through the Granite Hill region, all other thoughts were moot, as we were attacked once again by a dragon. This one rose from the Dragon Mound, much as Salok Nir had only a few days ago, at the call of the big black dragon, called Alduin. Vizhotnak, this one is called. And while this one was no lightweight, it seemed far easier to deal with than Salok Nir had been. Of course, I had the temporary assistance of the Dawn Guard, until they realized who and what I was, and then it was a 3-way melee between myself, a dragon, and 3 members of the Dawn Guard. In the aftermath, though, there was a disturbing thing found. A writ of dawn. An execution order with my name on it, and the implied agreement of the Jarl to do so. It doesn't say which Jarl, of course, so maybe it means nothing. Or it could mean everything. While I was certain I could survive any small group sent after me, if a Jarl decided to get involved, my survival might become far dicier. I kept the information from Lady Serana, at least for now. This is my problem to deal with. Delphine was waiting for us at the Giant, and after I retrieved my belongings taken before I infiltrated the embassy, I laid out what I had learned. At first she found it hard to believe that the Thalmore had nothing to do with the dragon's return, but when she heard that they thought the Blades were responsible, she had to chuckle, realizing the same thing I already had. That eventually led to Esbern, who she was shocked to learn was still alive. She'd thought him dead at the Thalmore's hands for years now. Once Riften was mentioned, she gave me more precise instructions, commenting slyly that if I thought she was paranoid, then I wouldn't believe how much so Esbern was. I am, as expected, to head for Riften. There I am to locate a man named Brynjolf. She referred to him as well-connected, but I get the impression there is more to it than that from her voice. He will help me find the Ratways, where Esbern is supposed to be hiding. Additionally, to prove I am no threat, I am supposed to ask him where he was on the 30th of Frostfall, which was 4-5 days ago? Obviously a code. Or calling a particular 30th of Frostfall to mind. As long as it doesn't get me killed somehow, I suppose it doesn't matter. So, to Riften. But first, we're going back to Whiterun. It is time that Serana gets her own horse. We have been talking a great deal on this trip, and I suspect she is getting closer to me than is perhaps wise. Having your lord's daughter show overmuch interest in you is not a good survival tactic when your lord is a vampire. We were waiting outside the Whiterun stables when the stable master emerged. To say he was a little surprised to see customers waiting for him would be a small understatement, but when Serana flashed a little gold, he was all smiles and glib talk. Though Serana has never ridden a horse before, I could tell that she at least knew about them and was a shrewd bargainer. Watching them banter back and forth while settling on a price was worth having to stand around and wait for them to finish. Once it was done, she mounted her new horse, Phoenix, and promptly learned that there is more to riding than just sitting on it. It took some time to teach her the basics, but she has a very sharp mind and a willingness to learn that I've rarely seen. Not, I suppose, that I've had much opportunity to teach others. With her now mounted, we started for Riften, where we would begin our search for an ancient blade. Apart from Serana gaining a new appreciation for horses and all the pain that comes with it, some of which would have been obviated had we ridden at night and her healing abilities were available, we made the ride to Riften with no complications. Stepping into the central area of the city itself, however, it suddenly occurred to us that we had no idea how to go about finding this Brynjolf person. Delphine had said he had connections, which should mean it wouldn't be hard to find in any other city. In Riften, though, nothing comes easily. I decided that the best thing to start with was simple observation. The market is the hub of the city, both literally and financially. If he is that well connected, he is almost certain to be here somewhere, and someone is bound to say his name and tip us off. Brynjolf was not what I expected, and I have no idea why Delphine mentioned that he had connections, but we did find him. A merchant in the market, hawking what he claimed was Thalmore blood elixir, and making all kinds of wild promises about what it could do, some of which I'm pretty sure were physically impossible. Regardless, once I had him identified, I asked about an old man in the Ratway. His demeanor changed slightly, just enough to catch my attention, and his eyes narrowed ever so slightly, as if he were re-examining me, and what I might actually want from him. His answer was vague enough that it might have been believable had I not seen those indicators. I'm not sure who this man is, but Delphine is right. He knows people, and I'm pretty certain he's going to be having them watch me closely. The answer he gave was simply that he didn't know of anyone in the Ratways, but that if he were hiding, that is where he'd be doing it. even gave us a quick set of directions to get to the Ratway, and a side comment that, if anyone did know where this old man in the Ratway was, it would be the people in the Ragged Flagon, a sort of tavern down there. I hope he's not planning an attack. Down there in the dark and away from the sun, I will be far more powerful than he can possibly imagine. The flagon was located on the other side of what almost felt like a deliberately set up gauntlet or test of some kind, though that could be my imagination, of course. The people there, when I arrived, were, well, I wouldn't expect friendly, not here, but less so even than I would have expected. While the people in the B&Bar were defensive in the way that they looked at me, these were almost possessive instead, as if counting all of my goods, putting a price to them all, and wondering if trying to take it would be worth their time. Serana watched my back, though while I spoke with the barkeeper, Vekkel the Man. Strange moniker. It cost nearly 600 septims for him to remember someone in the Ratway Warrens that might be the man we're looking for. One who was crazy enough that even the other crazy ones down there avoided him. And, perhaps most telling, that we weren't the only ones hunting for him. Which means the Thalmore are likely here. This is going to get bloody. Sounds like a good time for lunch. Vampirism does have another small advantage. The ability to sense life around you, no doubt to make hunting food easier. Here in the Warrens, it also allowed me to know where the Thalmore agents in these maze-like catacombs were hiding. This made getting dinner quite simple, as well as allowing me to get the drop on the remainder. In a short time, we were in a room full of closed and locked doors. A few of them were simple enough to walk past. Being able to see through what amounted to cell doors made it quite plain that the ones behind them were not the old man we were looking for. The same for those whose voices we could hear through those doors. There was one old hag going through a checklist of her meager belongings. In time, only one door remained, and so, with no other obvious options, I knocked on it. Vekkel had not been joking in the least. Esbern was clearly not entirely there when he answered. Even though he gave away who he was instantly, he wouldn't calm down enough to listen, thinking that the Thalmore had finally caught Delphine, and that she had led to him. When I finally got in the phrase edgewise, I told him to remember the 30th of Frostfall, and it was almost like a mage light had been cast in his head. He calmed instantly. One wooden bar and 5 locks later, plus the rattling of many chains, he ushered us quickly into his home. I learned more in the next 15 seconds of rambling than I had in hours from the Greybeards or Delphine. Esbern knew who Alduin was. The first dragon, the one that had been prophesied to destroy the world, from whom none, alive or dead, could escape. He had already accepted that the world was over except for the actual events. After all, the only one who could stop the beast was a Dragonborn, and there hadn't been any identified in 200 years. Then, with a raised hand to get his attention back on me, I informed him that his information was out of date. There was a single known Dragonborn, only recently revealed. His eyes widened with sudden hope, and he asked who it was, and I pointed to myself. He didn't question it, maybe he was just desperate, but I wasn't going to make him reconsider that. When he calmed again, there was an almost military feel to his speech as he ordered me to take him to Delphine. After, he grabbed a few things that he didn't want the Thalmore to get possession of. A few hours later, in the basement of the Sleeping Giant, I discovered that even Delphine has a hard time keeping up with the old archivist. This is a man so drowned in the arcana and knowledge of his chosen craft that it never occurs to him that others may have no idea what he's talking about. As turned out to be the case when he started immediately talking about something called Alduin's Wall and some place called Skyhaven Temple. Once again, Delphine had to slow him down, get him to explain what he was talking about slowly. In the days before the final disappearance of the dragons, the Blades of the Era commissioned an enormous stone carving to be made, Alduin's Wall, a pictographic representation of all knowledge of the World Eater, as well as the prophecies involving its return. This wall, though a monument in its way, was forgotten about over the years, along with its location. One of the few books that Esben managed to save from the Blade archives some years ago mentions the temple and the wall. This is where he believes our best hope of defeating the dragon, and, not incidentally, saving all of Nirn, lies. The information on that wall, he is certain, will have what we need. Delphine will escort Esbern to where they believe the temple is, a place now called Karthspire in the Reach. I know of this place as well, though it was only mentioned as a place to remain away from due to the high number of Forsworn camped there. That should make entry interesting. Myself and Serana will proceed separately to help avoid drawing attention to ourselves, and to clean out the camp when we arrive. 5 Suns Dusk, 4th Era, 201. I had been planning my assault on Karthspire, what I could of it anyhow, during the ride into the Reach. It turned out to be completely unneeded. The roar of a dragon was distinctive and easily recognized, and now we put boots to our mount's sides as we raced to follow that call. As we had suspected, this one, a spectral dragon, for its ability to be almost invisible, was already destroying the Forsworn of the Karthspire, which meant all we had to worry about was a dragon that could make itself nearly invisible. At night. Indeed, the final blow landed just as the first rays of the dawn crested the far mountains to the east, so even as the combat high was starting to drain off, so too did our vampiric abilities. On the upside, Esbern is now firmly convinced of my claims. Oh, yes, I didn't mention that. Both Delphine and Esbern, when they had seen the dragon on their own trip, had raced to battle it. This is, after all, what the Blades are supposed to be good at, given that both still lived, and this would be Delphine's second, now that I think on it. I think that good is an accurate description. Together now, we made our way to the entrance of Skyhaven Temple. Noticing a portion of the camp built onto the spire-like mountain, from which the site draws its name, we entered a cave in its side that led us into combat with more of the Forsworn. They didn't take long to clear out, and that allowed us to push further into the cave, where it suddenly opened up into something truly unusual. The path went back and forth across the 2 bridges, each locked with a puzzle of sorts. The puzzles basically required you to know only one symbol from the ancient Akaviri, Dragonborn. This allowed us to make short work of the bridges, ascending where none had gone since the temple was sealed hundreds of years ago. The next open area featured a large sculpture of the face of Riemann Cyrodiil, something that even Serana recognized. This prompted her to mutter almost under her breath that she was really, really old. Half jokes aside, the face clearly hid the path onward, and shortly after, Esben located the lock for the door. He calls it a blood seal, and I recall reading about that in the book he'd shown us. It was theorized, though it could not be proven, of course, that blood was the key to opening the door through that seal. Dragonborn blood. My blood, which, as you can guess, I am kind of partial to and would prefer to keep inside of my veins, where it belongs. However, when no other paths made themselves known, I sighed and cut open one of my fingers. A single drop and the whole seal almost exploded with light before a grinding noise nearly deafened us. When we could hear and see straight once again, the head had rotated back and up to reveal an entrance. Slowly, we walked through the door. The central chamber of the temple left little doubt as to the purpose of the previous blades. Dragon skeletons, skulls, and imagery were everywhere. Weapons of a make I'm not familiar with were on tables and in weapon racks, and though the place was covered with dust, there was a regalness to the place that defies explanation. The wall, though. That drew our attention quickly. The detailing, the craftsmanship. I doubt there are any teams of artisans in Skyrim today who could create something on this scale, with this clarity, and have it survive centuries of neglect. That, however, was only its appearance. What it might tell us was far more important. Esbern, all eyes on him, approached the wall and began his search for hope. I think that Delphine had been hoping for an easy solution, something quick and decisive. She was to be disappointed, however. Esbern took his time in interpreting what he saw, telling Delphine that the Akaviri were not a straightforward people, couching everything in allegory and symbolism. When he got to the central part of the wall, however, he paused as if checking his own reading of what he saw. The central figure was distinctive. It was Alduin, the great black dragon I had seen twice now. The legends say that the Nord voices, the predecessors to Jurgen Windcaller and the Greybeards, had shouted Alduin out of existence. The shrines on the 7,000 steps had confirmed that story, yet Alduin was clearly back, so the shout could not have done what they claim. The wall, however, also clearly showed the voices using a shout to defeat Alduin. There was no way to know which shout, however, and left us no better off than we were before. Delphine, after confirming I had no idea what shout was being referenced here, almost seemed to collapse in on herself. And then, with extreme reluctance, said it was time to ask the Greybeards about that shout. I'm not sure what the history is between the Blades and the Greybeards, but it's clearly not a good one. But me, being Dragonborn, allows me to ask things that the Blades dare not. I haven't gone after the world wall that Arngir already sent me for. Perhaps it's time to deal with that oversight before returning to the throat of the world and politely demanding a few more answers. I have heard some mentions of caves both forgotten and forlorn, and really just about any other adjective that you might want to put in front of the word to describe a cave. I say this because Arngir's directions to the Forsaken Cave would not exactly have given people other than myself, or the people of Windhelm, any real direction. To us, however, it is a known and named location, somewhere to the west of the city. The real expert on this cave, however, is a local shopkeeper, an old man who runs the White Phial, the local apothecary, to be specific, though why he spent so much time looking at and around that place is anyone's guess. For myself, I'd heard him rant about it once or twice while I was curled up against the walls of his place of business in my years as a beggar, but have no more real information than the name, which meant that, reluctantly, I had to return to Windhelm and speak with the old man, try to learn the location of the cave and his specific interest in it. The old man, Mer, rather, for he is an Altmer, is Nurelian, and his disposition was even worse than I remember. I was walking in as he was trying to convince his assistant to let him leave, which the cough and wheezing that Nurelian was exhibiting was not helping with. The assistant finally put his foot down and walked off to tend to another part of the store, which left me free to ask what they'd been arguing about, though I'd gotten more than enough to understand exactly what it was. Nurelian's illness is reaching the terminal stage, and that has happened just as he had figured out how to enter a portion of the Forsaken Cave he'd not been able to before. And now, the object he seeks within it, the White Phial, will be forever out of reach. A word wall and a legendary object in the same cave. How interesting. Depending on its condition when I find it, it may not have been there when I return. I still have a museum to supply, after all. But with the promise that I was working on the problem on his behalf, I turned around and headed for the location described to me, one I had passed several times in the previous months. The cave was more lined with ice than it was carved from rock, somewhat unusual in my admittedly still limited experience. So too were its inhabitants, a pair of wolves, a pair of bears, and a troll. Most of these had already torn each other apart, so I was saved that effort minus the one survivor, a bear that can no longer make that claim. The cave, as a result of its ice lining, was cold, but the architecture I could see was clearly ancient Nord. The story Nurelian had told me said that the last owner of the phial had been a master-class Nordic alchemist, so at least so far, the information all seems to be tracking. As one might expect in a Nordic tomb, or at least as I have learned to expect, there were a large number of Draugr who had risen. They were not particularly hard to deal with, but the sheer number of them was interesting to me, as much so as the number of silver bars I found lying around, especially given the propensity for silver to make life hard on the undead. Speaking of which, holding my own silver bow was somewhat of a challenge. I had to pull a glove out for my left hand to keep it from burning my hand somewhat, an ironic twist in a way. A weapon that I made to combat the risen dead is now hurting the hand that created it. I'd laugh if it were anyone but myself. The chamber we entered was clearly meant to be the centerpiece of the entire tomb. The size, openness, the elaborate carvings all over the room made that clear. If it hadn't been, then the 6 Draugr that rose as one, including one from a central sarcophagus in the center of the room, made sure that the point was made. I was able to get an arrow or two into the center one before all of them were on me. The smell of burning ancient flesh, my own sweat, and the scent of death in the air all combined to create a memory, especially with the added image of a Draugr with dancing arcs of electricity flashing along its limbs, that I shall not soon forget. Serana was not idle, though I did have to pull my shot once or twice to avoid doing her damage. She tore into the undead with all the zeal and ferociousness that I would expect from a vigilant. In short order, we had the situation in hand, and the undead were dead once again. This allowed me to look around the room even more closely. In this room was the word wall I had been directed to, and when the word upon it was branded into my mind, I almost had to smile at what that word had been. Of all the words, all the shouts I could have been sent to, this one was the first they chose. The word was kill, something I have become very proficient at in the last while. Almost immediately, one of the bits of dragon knowledge in my skull combined with it, and I now have a new shout available to me. I call it Marked for Death, and I can't wait to find a good time to try it out. Now, the phial. There was a passageway under the wall that led deeper in, so we followed it. We poured Nurelian's mixture into the bowl he had told us would be present, then watched as it somehow caused a door to open. Beyond was a workshop where, on a display stand on the far end, was what I presume to be the object I seek. I had 2 immediate observations about the White Phial. First, For something called the white file, it looked decidedly green. Second, it had a large crack running straight through it, which I suspect means that it is completely useless. Which also means I'll be taking it back to Windhelm to deliver. Intact, this might have been a major centerpiece of the museum. Cracked, it's just another old bottle. A small waste, but only a small one. The main goal of this trip has now been accomplished, so once I drop off this broken piece of garbage, I can head for High Hrothgar to further my knowledge of the voice, and the shout that can down Alduin.